everyone. Hi, thank you for your patience. For those who are early, I hope you enjoyed the jazz music. If you realize that we took extra effort to make the work from home a little more positive and energized. But so I'm Elena. I think I see some familiar faces or familiar names in the call, and some of you are new, but welcome to Connect One's second actually online fireside chat. We did one just 2 weeks ago. And so, just a little background about ourselves before we, or rather more like some guidelines to optimize experience while we're waiting for the rest to join us. I think most of us know Zoom etiquette by now, so thank you for muting yourself to optimize experience. Also indicate your name if you have not done so that we know who we are speaking to. Thirdly, make use of the chat bubble to just kind of drop questions along the way. We will take those questions only during the Q&A session, sometime in the middle of the call. But last but not least, please stay on the call till the end of the hour. It should not take more than an hour. Even though some of the early parts of the discussion is around some of the compliance areas for the Singapore market, but the rest of the call, for those who are not based in the Singapore market, the rest of the call will also be very informational for you. So please stay on. I think right now we probably have, let me see, about more than 10 people on the call. We're expecting about 20, but I think we can dive straight into it already if everyone is ready. All right. So you must be wondering, I think some of you may know who we are and what we do, and you must be wondering why we're doing this call. Since actually, for the background of those who don't know us so well, we've been working with early stage startup founders since 2013. So it's been about 7 years now, helping them to build and optimize their teams for growth. For the most part of the last 7 years, it has been scaling and growing their teams. And things have been obviously trending upwards, as we all know. But the last few months saw a very unexpected turn, again, as we all know too. And this sudden growth story made a turn into a contraction. And so hence, this is something that I guess many startup founders have not really seen or experienced. A community of startup founders that I'm in, they're called Southeast Asia Founders, got together just at the start of this COVID crisis. And we talked about, what immediate impact it had on our business. And the top two impact was number one, delayed or declining revenues. And the second one was really, how do we preserve cash flow, right? As runways were, evaporating. So as a business owner yourself, I believe there are founders and there are also investors on this call. Salary cost is about the biggest threat, to our cash flow. And we really don't know how long, this is going to last. Even though, the Singapore government and many governments around the region have been doling out lots of measures, to help the economy and to help us support this season, this period. But I think many of us are still, contemplating the unpleasant reality of letting people go. So since we have the expertise in-house, we decided to just, put together very quickly and host this call, hoping to be able to, share our tips, some of our, with you guys, so that it makes, whatever decision that you've made or making, planning to make, a simpler and smoother one. So I'd like to introduce the team who will be leading this chat. Joanna will actually be leading the whole session today, and she'll be supported by Sabrina. Both of them have many years of HR experience behind them, and also in the startup ecosystem. So I leave you guys in their hands, and allow me to just pin the screen over to Joanna. Joanna?
Hi everyone, it's Joanna Yu here. I'm a director at Connect One. I've spent the last 25 years doing strategic HR and talent management, both as a consultant with the likes of, Mercer and PwC, as well as, in corporate HR roles, right, with Shell, with AMD, and Singapore Post. So it was at SingPost that I was, while helping them build the e-commerce logistics team, that I was introduced to the whole startup ecosystem. So we got very excited, and I, pivoted over to serve the startup ecosystem in 2017. So as Elena said, it was all growth, 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 and recruitment, 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 until, we just had to swing very quickly, in the last 2 months to this whole topic of retrenchment. So today, my key message to you is that, while retrenchment is a very sensitive and difficult topic to talk about, it is all about balancing compliance and compassion to be able to minimize disruption to your business. So that is what we'll be covering today. I will now, hand over to Sabrina, who will introduce herself. Sab, over to you.
Thanks, Joanna. Hi everyone, it's Sabrina So here, and I'm a senior consultant at Connect One. I've spent the last almost 20 years in in-house and outsourced environments. My specialization is in talent acquisition, APAC Com and Ben, employee engagement, and building from scratch in startups. I spent the first 10 years in corporate organization as a HR specialist and a Com and Ben specialist with SingHealth, Tata, and Talent2. I came on board the tech ecosystem in 2012. I've internally managed HR teams in Sogo and Ematic Solutions, which were online and SaaS businesses. Just like Joanna, I enjoy working with many founders and understanding tech trends in this bustling ecosystem. Before we start to go into the real grid, Joanna will share an overall summary of what we'll be covering in this session. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Ab. So back to me. Right. Okay, so, before we even move into the 3C model, let me cover some base assumptions, right? We are assuming here that everyone on this call, you've already explored several things, right? You've, like Elena said, you've explored all the options to keep your teams intact, with the Singapore government support on wage assistance, bridging loans. You've also implemented, all the possible cost savings in terms of shorter work weeks, unpaid leave, salary and bonus cuts, even reduced hours, right? So all that has been explored, but you finally reach the point where you think, I have no choice now but to lay some people off. You've reviewed your business model. You've actually decided on the core team you need to continue with that business model, and you've actually prepared a list list of people that you may now need to let go, right? And you're wondering what to do next. So at Connect One, this is the starting point for our webinar, right? That you've already done all that, and you've got that list done. So we've come up with a model that you saw earlier, which is called the 3C model. If you can look at that again, Elena. So the 3 C's stand for compliance, compassion, and communication, right? So let me just briefly introduce what we will be covering so that you know what's coming up. So under compliance, we will be looking at laws and regulations that are in place to protect both employees and employers during this retrenchment process. These will include notice periods, severance payments or ex gratia payments, tax declarations that need to be done, and cancellation of employment passes for foreigners, right? So as startup founders and investors yourselves, the reason you need to be aware of these legal requirements is so that you can manage your financial and reputational risk, right? And the details that we are covering today are Singapore-centric, but will serve as a general guideline for other countries as well, if you are joining us from outside Singapore, right? So for compliance, it's actually a very, very vital ingredient in the whole retrenchment exercise. because retrenchment is an emotionally draining and mentally exhausting process for everyone involved, from founders to retrenched employees to even people who are remaining in the business, right? So we will share a framework on how to manage the emotional reactions, right, for the employees, and some practical tips on how to manage this whole compassion bit. Now, for communication, it is basically the glue that holds compliance and compassion together. We will go through steps on how to identify internal and external stakeholders, and also how to design and target key messages for each of these stakeholders. So these will be the 3 sections that we will cover. Sabrina will take us through compliance, and I will cover compassion and communication before we cover Q&A at the end, right? So over to Sabrina to cover compliance.
Thanks, Joanna, for walking through some of the key highlights for today evening. As we move on, I'll be sharing more insights about the compliance process and some key items that we need to consider from the start. I hope to be able to answer some questions that you may have at the end of this session. As we move into the compliance parts that I'll be sharing, I would like to share the caveat to the best of our knowledge. As employment regulations changes from time to time, it would be ideal to check closer to the date of any execution of retrenchment. For March of 2009 to 2019, retrenchment in Singapore has been increasing. The past few months have been tumultuous with our current COVID situation. Singapore government has been proposing various budget schemes to be able to help employers with operational losses. What I'll cover will be a very broad overview of government-related regulators that we must be mindful of. I will also be sharing a timeline of an retrenchment exercise from preparation to administration in the following slides. As I go through the very first, Elena, back to the core government. Yeah. So with that, I'll be covering first of all MOM, as we all know, which is also Ministry of Manpower, and that's also, like, my daily mantra in terms of all employment matters. It is a good directory for most employment information for local citizens, Singapore citizens, and foreigners in Singapore. However, with any retrenchment exercise, employers with at least 10 employees must notify MOM if there is actually retrenchment of 5 or more employees within a 6-month span. So of course, then it comes with an exclusion period. If you would be actually a startup with lesser than 10 employees, you might be excluded. And after a retrenchment exercise, you will also need to submit notification within 5 days after the retrenchment exercise is delivered or employees are notified. So in terms of notifying MOM of retrenchment exercises, this will also enable the Workforce Singapore to be able to help with analysis and data survey reports of retrenchment in Singapore. The requirements to notify MOM of retrenchment applies to permanent employees, as well as contract employees with full contract tenure of at least 6 months. And I'll move on to IRAS right now, which is also the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. So it's always good, right, before we run any retrenchment exercise, to be able to check in advance what's taxable, sharing similar information when affected staff would ask us any questions as employers. In Singapore, it is mandated for employers, and they are liable to hold the last month payment in terms of any income tax clearance, right? So at the start, what we need to do is really to prepare payroll records for the appropriate submission. For the locals, it will be the form IRAA, and for the foreigners, it will be form IR21. For foreigners in Singapore PR, employees need to also withhold salary as early as a month before the actual retrenchment date. So this gives sufficient time for income tax clearance, and most employees usually bear their own tax unless it is indicated otherwise on the employment contract. In view of the current COVID-19 situation, the employer will be given a 1-month extension in terms of any sick, if you need to seek any tax clearance, you're given a longer timeline this time. So as an employer, we usually also have to, process tax clearance for foreigners and local citizens. And if you have got any tax queries, you can also contact IRAS directly for all income tax matters. As I move on to CPF, which is also a Central Provident Fund of Singapore. So CPF, in terms of what we've been seeing in terms of any retrenchment exercise, or even in our day-to-day payroll computations, this will apply mainly to the locals who are actually retrenched. The payroll person must understand payroll allowances well and what payments are actually CPF deductible. And handling the last payment or last payout for the retrenched affected staff with accuracy is actually very important. So these are the three different government bodies that we will talk about that will impact payroll computation in some way or other. And the last government body that you see at the bottom of this page, which is actually TAFEP, which is also your tripartite alliance for fair and progressive employment practices. Of course, with any employment relationship, we are always hoping things to be all good. But in terms of any employment dispute or any complex employment issue, we can always refer back to MOM, TAFEP. We should be able to understand as an employer the Local Employment Act and some of the TAFEP guidelines to be able to also share very objective and best practice employer practices line away. So this is actually a good summary of some of the government regulators that we need to take note of in terms of any retrenchment. Okay, as next steps, I'll be walking through some necessary steps that we need to actually take as early as actually 1 month, right? So this is what you see right now is actually a timeline to prepare for retrenchment. And we're going to be looking from the left of the page to the right of the page. And in terms of what we see there, basically 1 month before retrenchment, and this is on the assumption that we already have a list of people that are to be laid off, right? And what we need to process is, of course, very accurate final payment for your affected staff. And this will, of course, encompass things, and we need to consider payable salaries, proration as per last working day, your leave balance to be encashed, any notice period payment, ex gratia payment, if any, or some may call it severance payment. And this is where CPF and IRAS would also, come into place, where basically for the locals to understand what payment items are CPF deductible and not. For IRAS, we need to file the form IR21 for the foreigners, and this should be ideally done after tax clearance is completed, and we can actually deduct the tax amount from the final payroll. So as we move into 2 weeks before actual retrenchment, 2 weeks has lapsed, and during this 2 weeks, things may change, right? Because employees may also be taking extra leave, or they may be, there might be some unpaid leave that has been taken during these 2 weeks. So basically what we do at this stage is to review the final payment and to update if there's any changes to pay items. And these are the items that will actually affect your last payout. And getting your action timeline in place and reviewing the right personnel that will roll out the retrenchment exercise. And this is what we do at 2 weeks. And we move into the actual day of retrenchment, which is the orange dot that we actually see on the screen, right? So this is the actual day where the actual retrenchment exercise takes place. So with that, right, as we move on to the actual day, in terms of the communication plan, this is something that Joanna will be covering, my colleague Joanna will be covering later on. We also have to bear in mind some of the things that we need to take note of during the actual day, which is of course getting together the communication team, getting a good handover done to pass on, to the unaffected staff from the affected staff. And we also have to look into things like termination of office and IT access. And this will probably lead to a smooth exit clearance for most of us. So once that is done and this is completed in terms of the retrenchment exercise, that's where MOM comes in, right? Because we have 5 days from the actual date of completion of the retrenchment exercise to be able to cancel employment passes or to even notify MOM in terms of the retrenchment exercise that we have done. Yeah. And at the end of this session, right, we'll also be sharing a link basically on some open roles in our current COVID situation and some of the companies that are still hiring. So with this compilation, you also find some profiles to be able to hire, and it will be shared at the end, towards the end. So thank you everyone for listening in on the compliance section. I'll pass my time over to my colleague Joanna. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sab, for covering compliance. So that was pretty heavy going with a lot of lists, checklists on things that need to be done. This typically covers the rational side of retrenchment, right? The lists in terms of regulations that need to be completed. Now, I will be talking more now about the compassionate side of retrenchment. As I said before, it's really a very emotionally draining and mentally exhausting process for everybody involved, right? So from founders to retrench employees to those who remain. And I know as founders, many of you prefer to stay in the realm of data and rationale, but this is where you really need to dig into your emotional reserves, right? So we're going to share with you a model on the different reactions, right? So yeah, this, like I said, it's very, so we're gonna, yeah, so this is called the Kubler-Ross change model, or what we call the path, the 5 stages of grief. This is how people are likely to react when they receive bad news, right? So the 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, before they finally emerge on the other side of acceptance. So the whole goal of this whole compassion section is to help you get from the left side of the curve to the right side to acceptance as quickly as possible so people can move on. This is the purpose of the whole compassionate section, right? So in denial, when you are likely to hear things like, are you kidding? Is this a joke? Tell me this is not true, right? When you hear words like that, it's likely the person is reacting with denial. Or if they show a little bit more aggression, you will hear things like, how can you do this to me? This is so unfair. You know, what's going to happen to my family? You guys have been so irresponsible. If you hadn't, done all those whiskey nights, we wouldn't be in this position, right? That's the anger coming out. Bargaining could be things like, can you not do this? I promise I will, market more aggressively and we'll try and bring in more revenue, right? Can we try that out first? I've got a couple of ideas. Or they could react with depression, right? Right at the bottom of that valley, you could hear things like, I'm really so useless. I'm hopeless. I'm ready at the end of my tether. I don't know what to do next, right? And before they finally move to the acceptance curve, some people move there very quickly, some a lot slower. So acceptance, you will hear things like, for example, I know I saw this coming. I knew this was going to happen already. I'm ready for this. Let's just get this over with so that we can move forward. So these are the likely things that you will hear in the reaction when you actually deliver this news, right, on the retrenchment day. Now, what we are going to show you on the next slide are actually some communication strategies that you can use through these 5 stages, right? So at denial stage, when they're like, are you kidding me? This is not true. The tip is to get to the point quickly. You stick to your script, state the facts clearly that this is really happening. The job no longer exists and you are being let go, right? State very honestly and respectfully. Don't drag out the process. Don't try and, joke or make small talk at this stage. Just get straight to the point. Now, if there is aggression and you hear a lot of anger in the room, please stay calm, right? Don't fight fire with fire. Listen, show concern, wait for the staff's response, and then restate your message clearly and calmly, right? About what has been happening. Now, for bargaining and depression, it is very tempting for us to go into a counseling mode to try and calm them down and to be sympathetic. Now, our advice here is actually to stay in manager mode and deliver again the message and the process, because people need to understand and hear what is really happening, right? If we go into counseling mode, you might slip them back into the left side of the curve, where they go back into denial and anger. The point of this is to move them towards acceptance, right? So be clear about the decision and the process, stay firm, take responsibility, don't make empty promises that can't be met, right? And finally, if people are already in the acceptance mode, then it's a case of, restating the process, go over the package details. Like you saw from what Seth presented, the final payment is usually minus CPF, minus tax, minus, includes leave, minus leave. So go through those things clearly and carefully so that people understand what that final payment entails, right? Don't rush through that process. And finally, internalization, once they've reached that, you can clarify the next steps and then including any support. Once they are ready to hear you and ready to move forward, then you can give steps, give the next point on what to do, right? In terms of references that you will give them or helping them to find jobs. That is the point at which you can actually move on to next steps. Okay. So this is the curve that we will we usually use to counsel or to help people who are delivering the message. The next slide, I'm actually going to show you some best practices in terms of practical tips that you can do in terms of compassion, right? So when we run these exercises as HR, we usually, step one, we actually give them some indication that business is not going well before that layoff announcement. So there's no sudden layoff. People know that revenues are down, we need to cut costs, and some of the rationale behind it. So that's the best practice. Two, in terms of timing of the announcement, we advise you to avoid Fridays at the end of work or first thing on Monday morning, right? Wednesdays or Thursdays are ideal because you give the retrenched employee enough time during a work week to maybe get their CVs out, to say goodbyes to their, their fellow employees. But in this case, everybody's already working from home, so a little less of that, right? But it gives people a bit of time to adjust, but not so much time that they are brooding on bad news for a long period, right? So Wednesdays or Thursdays are ideal. And the third thing is, please, for yourselves, prepare a script and follow that script, okay, of what you want to say. Taking into account, the anticipation of that, which stage of likely reaction you're going to have as well, right? And finally, as part of that script, do familiarize yourself with the final pay package, because at the end of the day, after the shock kicks in, people are really concerned about, how much am I going to take away and how long is it going to last me? So do take time to understand what that final payment is, and take time to understand the different components of it. Familiarize yourself with the contract details as well. Okay, so these are the practical tips for compassion. If you have questions, just note them down, and we will in the chat, and then we will cover it at the end, right? Let me now move on quickly to communications. So communication is basically, is, like I said earlier, the glue that ties compliance and compassion together. Most of you would know this already, right? The first rule of communications is know your audience. So do take time to identify your internal and external stakeholders. Then once you've done that, assess the level of influence and support, and then design the communications plan. I'm going to take you through some examples of what a communication, what this would look like, right? So the next step, so the next slide, we're going to talk about stakeholders. So what do we mean by stakeholders? they are usually individuals who are either affected by this change or have the ability to impact that change. So in the case of retrenchments, a stakeholder could be team leads or managers who are managing the employees if you have a large team. Employees who will be retrenched, obviously. Employees who remain as well, because if you're going to be dependent on them to continue your business. So you need to make sure you maintain some morale as well in the business. And then if you have any HR or IT person who is going to help you do the last day exit, they need to be informed ahead of time so that preparation can be made. External stakeholders, as Seth mentioned earlier, could include Ministry of Manpower, IRAS, TAFEP. And finally, if you have been a bit of a media darling in relation to startups, you may also want to think about how you, you use some media messaging that you might want to have ready so that, when they come to you, you can respond with a positive message, right? So the next thing, once we've identified stakeholders, is actually to do a stakeholder analysis or matrix. Now, I know this looks a bit complicated, but stay with me. You need to do this if you have a larger team of maybe up to 20 to 30 people. But if you have a small team, maybe you don't have to do this. But what we're actually trying to do here is to determine the level of influence they have on the retrenchment and support they have for the program. So let me take manager A and manager B as an example here, right? Manager A has got a high influence. They are well respected and people listen to what they say. And they also they support this exercise because they know it's vital for the survival of the business. Whereas manager B is equally well respected and is, is one of your influencers, but they are unconvinced about this exercise. So if you were to choose an ally or somebody to deliver that message, you might want to use manager A instead of manager B. Or, spend more time trying to move to get more support from manager B before allowing them to, deliver your message if you choose to use them, right? And finally, the last, once you've done the stakeholder analysis and determine the influence and the support they have, you can move to design the communications plan. So I'm going to flash an example of a communications plan next, right? So I know it looks a bit complicated, but it pays to be prepared, okay? So for your team leads and managers, the message could be, business rationale, list of people to be retrenched or remain, the support they require to deliver the message, give them the scripts, tell them how you're going to manage the feedback. You might want to do this at a leadership, a leadership meeting, an exclusive meeting, 2 weeks before the announcement, right? So they are ready, prepared. You have to keep this, of course, highly confidential. So that you're actually preparing them to move on that change curve ahead of the others. They can help the others to come across, right? Then the retrenched employees, the key message would be, the rationale, then the retrenchment letter, make sure you have all the contractual details laid down, the exit date, the financial, details, and support for outplacement, which is, after you've retrenched them, what other support they may have. Have a preset date, have a founder or line manager, and in the presence of a HR person if you have one available. Now, this sometimes it's useful if you actually have, I actually advise guys, if you're having females, a female employee you're going to let go and you're worried about the reaction, maybe have another senior female in the room as well, a more mature female in the room as well, to manage, if there are any emotional outbursts, right? I know males can cry too, but just be careful of this dynamic, right? This is the advice I usually give line managers or people who are delivering this message. So for the employees who are remaining as well, be sure to have messages prepared as well on the rationale, what the next steps are for the new normal, what role changes that may be, what process changes, what handovers need to take place once the retrenched employees leave, and also take some time to do a morale booster. If that's the last of the retrenchment, tell them no more, you guys can get back to work. Because the last thing you want is for the core team that you want to remain to start looking for jobs because they're worried they might be next, right? So it's important to have this communication. And finally, like HR or IT or even, make sure that there's a playbook or next steps that needs to be done as well. So MOM, external stakeholders, we've already covered. Media, I will leave you guys, to decide if it's necessary or not for startups, right? So this is the communications plan that we have kind of put together as an example to guide you guys. I'm sure there will be other questions and other things that you have as well. Right, so that's all for the communication section. I think we can open up for Q&A now. You can either type your questions or unmute yourself. So I think we have a Q&A slide as well, Elena, as the next slide. Yeah, so if feel free to, we've got about 20 minutes to take questions, or 15 minutes to take questions before we close. So feel free to unmute and state your name and then ask your question, and then we will try to answer it to the best of our ability. Any questions? Maybe we can do video mode.
Hi, this is Ali Fancy, Central Ventures.
Hi,
hello there. Hi, Elena. Thank you very much, both of you, for a fantastic presentation. One of the comments or concerns that we've been getting now, you feel free to tell me I'm off topic here, because this is a presentation designed for Singapore, but most of our investments in other countries, is what is written in the labor law and what you have to pay as severance are sometimes two different things to avoid labor court. So if severance says, the law says you need to pay 2-month severance, in these types of circumstances, when you're doing mass layoffs, labor court is still open possibility which the employee may seek. And to avoid that, I've heard that to pay a little bit extra kind of makes this problem go away. Could you share your views on this?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. Usually the employment law states a basic minimum, but there are also practices in the market which people follow. And one rule of thumb that we often use is 1 month for every year of service is typically a severance payment. I repeat again, 1 month for every year of service. So that is typically a rule of thumb we use. If you can afford to pay it, of course, that's what we do encourage in terms of severance or ex gratia. But if you can't, then, stick to the minimum amount. And I think in the case of startups, you actually have quite a good, you actually have a good case if it gets brought up in any court of law, in terms of you can show your burn rates and your revenues. But that is typically the rule of thumb that we follow. And this is what I've implemented in regional setups as well, not just in Singapore. But these are for corporates usually.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything else you want to add there?
So in a lot of our startups that we are dealing with, right, it also depends on how matured your current startup is, right? I've seen matured startups paying severance, but I've also seen the early stage startups, like, those who are probably Series A and younger, not being able to pay. And that's also because, you know, they are not exactly at a point where they are already generating good revenue of their own.
Okay. Any other questions we can help with?
Hi, Lisa here. I have a question.
Yes, hi Lisa.
Hi. Okay, so I have a particular case. So if a staff has already resigned, but the staff has a 6-month notice, and the company is currently going through cost-cutting measures like shorter work week or reduced wages, but this staff is just not going to consent to any of these cost-cutting measures. So is there anything else that the company can do then?
If they've already resigned?
Yeah, already resigned, but has a 6-month notice to serve.
Okay.
So this is not a retrenchment case, it's a resignation case.
So it started off as the employee resigning, but currently the company is going through cost cutting. But this person, because he has a 6-month notice, I'm just wondering if there's any advice on what we can do if he refuses to take any cost cutting measures like a shorter work week, for instance.
Is this only for one particular employee, or are we talking about quite a number? It
One.
sounds like just one, right?
Yes, one.
Okay. If you're looking at Singapore context, usually what's on your notice is what it is, right? In terms of your employment contract.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, if you know you're on good relationships with this particular employee, you can, you know, do sit down and look at some creative options out of it, like a shorter work week, or to look into really looking into every single option to see whether maybe is there something else this person can do. Most of the time, in most scenarios, if this person is already on a 6 months notice like that, I don't think there's very much we can do. And, you know, it is also a legal binding contract relationship. Maybe Joanna wants to add on anything else that, you know.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop you from putting this person on the retrenchment list either, right? Because the thing about retrenchment is you've got to prove, number one, that the role no longer exists or is no longer required. So if you can prove that, then you have a case for retrenchment. They can't take it to court, right? So that's where you need a watertight case. You need to prove that you know, your role no longer exists because business has dropped. So you just need to prepare so that you don't get into cases of unlawful dismissal.
Right. Okay. So that means it's possible to retrench someone who has already resigned and is serving notice.
Yeah, just make sure that you have a watertight case, that the role no longer exists.
I see. Okay.
But the danger is if the danger is if, let's say, you get somebody else later to do this person's job, then it's a case, then that person actually has a case to go to report, to say, hey, you know, this role actually still exists. They ask somebody to take over.
All right.
So you just need to make sure that you really no longer require the role when you put that name on the retrenchment list.
All right. Okay, Ken. Thank you so much.
And don't also use performance as an issue. Performance is you can't use performance as an excuse in this case.
Okay.
Only retrenchment is only applies when the role no longer exists. Performance issues, poor performance is a separate discussion.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Okay.
And thanks.
Welcome. Any other questions we can help with?
Yes, one more. Ali Fancy again, Sento. Looking for industry benchmarks, please, on when employees are asked to take salary cuts in exchange for ESOP. So, for example, we maybe have one company needs to do quite a large number of to reduce its HR costs significantly, but they're not of the view that they need to lay off people. What they want to do is put everybody to half salary, and they're willing to trade that for ESOP. And now, what multiple of ESOP should that be? Is it 1-for-1 on salary? Is it 1.5 to 1? Is it 2 to 1? What benchmarks have you seen?
I personally haven't seen trade-offs of salary cuts for ESOP because typically salary cuts are temporary, right? Whereas ESOP is a long-term remuneration. So I would caution about exchanging that because it might complicate your cap table and everything later on. So you might want to think about other ways to remunerate, like, you know, when revenue comes back, to have a bit more bonus or profit sharing, because that might be easier to manage than actual, you know, giving of ESOP. Because they are actually two different vehicles. One is for short term and one is for long term remuneration. I don't know if you know, people agree with me, but that's my view of this. You know, Sab or Elena, do you guys have any view on this?
Actually, Ali, speaking to, you know, many founders throughout this period. In fact, today I was on a panel with ACE and with a few startup founders, and we all agreed that one possible way is to actually have this sort of a MOU, like a promise of, you know, so we cut the salaries now, but a promise to reinstate what was cut, you know, when things are better, and we can define what things are better means, you know, rather than delve into the equity pool and confuse the issue. Because I think at the end of the day, what is the motivation of the individual, right? If they are at the bottom of the pyramid and they do need to bring food back on the table, ESOP is not going to, you know, make much of a difference. So I would say, you know, perhaps consider this option of kind of like everyone tightening the belt for a short term, just eat less or eat less quality food for a while. Everyone does that. But then, you know, and we know that from SARS, that the recovery, and even looking at China now, the recovery is amazing. So, and looking at SARS, the recovery didn't take very long either. So we're talking about, if you can just, you know, like kind of like hold on to the end of the year, perhaps the company can then reinstate the cash. I think that might be better than to, you know, kind of like dip into the equity pool. So that's kind of like, I think to me, a more practical way. But I do acknowledge last month, when things were looking so gloomy and there were no support from anyone, many founders that I knew were also contemplating this, you know, equity just to keep the employees. But I think now that we are a little more stable and we see the support coming from the community and the government, I feel that we're a bit more rational about the decisions that we make. I'm not sure, Ali, if that helps, or are you still, you know, are your portfolio companies still, you know, in that very fear kind of a zone and just trying to grapple at all sides of straws?
Oh, our portfolio companies aren't based in Singapore, so they don't have any government support. They're still in a complete, total chaos. So we're lucky living in Singapore to have a government which has just approached us with a very heavy iron hand. It's not
I think in Malaysia, well, I think Malaysia is dishing out some stuff, but obviously, you know, and Indonesia, of course, we know hasn't really got their act together much.
One thing I can say, Ali, though, is I to your question earlier about you know, whether there are any best practices when it comes to salary cuts. We do usually advocate a sliding scale. That means those who are paid more will have more cut than those who are earning less, right? So if, you know, and you use like the minimum wage, not minimum wage, the average wage of a country as a cutoff point, right? So in Singapore, it's $4,600. So anything above $4,600, you can consider cutting salary. Anything less than that, we try to maintain, right? So you need to find out in each country what the average salary is, and then apply salary.
That's helpful.
I don't know if that's
very helpful. That is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question here in the chat. What is the difference between retrenchment and termination? So retrenchment, as I said before, happens when a role disappears, right? Because revenues have dropped or the business model has changed and it's no longer required. Now, termination could be for, you know, a poor performance. It could also be for, you know, theft or anything that's, you know, to do with integrity. You can terminate somebody for that. Now, the danger is sometimes when you don't know how to handle retrenchments properly. I've seen CEOs tell me to, you know, give somebody a poor performance to get rid of them when it's actually a retrenchment and they don't want to pay severance. So please don't do that, right? If somebody has performed poorly, then you actually need records of up to 6 months that the person, they have actually received feedback that they are poor performer, and they have been given a chance to remedy that situation before termination is carried out. Now, if they have been a good performer up to now and you have actually given them a good performance appraisal or given them some indication even in emails, great job, whatever, and then you suddenly terminate them for poor performance, that is a case for unlawful dismissal, right? So in the case of retrenchments, it is clearly that the job no longer exists, right? That role has gone away. Whereas termination could be for poor performance or for, integrity issues. Right, that's the key difference between the two. Jamie, I hope that answers, sorry, was it Jamie who answered that question?
Yes, it was Jamie.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, how are we able to withdraw an offer letter without repercussions? This is an offer, I'm assuming it's an offer letter that you issued before COVID happened and now COVID has happened. In that case, I think, if it's before the starting date, even if it's after the starting date, if there's a clear business reason for it, we do see it happen. The withdrawal of offer letters for jobs and for internships and things like that.
Yeah. If you're coming from a startup, it's probably going to be easier. But if you come from a union company and you're asking this question, please check with your union first.
Thanks for that, sir.
Yeah.
Well, we're assuming everybody here is from a startup.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've spent 15 minutes with questions. We can take probably one more if there are any?
There's another question, Joanna from Ika.
Okay, if we were to retrench an employee, do we need to pay notice or do we give severance pay? Sab, you want to cover that?
Sure. So in any Singapore context scenario, right, usually if your employee is, according to the MOM regulation as well, if you have been serving employment for more than 2 years, the severance pay does come into play, and you can actually check what is the exact amounts that you need to pay based on the employment period your employee has. So, generally, if anything that is below according to MOM standards, you just need to pay a notice pay.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So just to summarize that, if it's more, if the employee has worked more than 2 years,
Yes.
you may have to pay severance and notice. If it's below, you only pay notice. Below 2 years, you pay notice.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem.
Or you can get them to serve out that notice period, then you don't have to pay anything. Or you can call it garden leave as well, right?
Okay.
That they may, you still have to pay them that last month's salary, but you don't have to, they don't have to do any work, basically. That's what garden leave means.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, that was, thank you for your, active engagement and your questions. We hope that, we were able to help you, going through this really, difficult and unfortunate topic that we have to deal with, but we hope we've given you practical steps that it can be done, and it can be done in, complying with the law and also being compassionate so that people leave with their dignity and their self-confidence intact. Right, that's the whole purpose that we're trying to achieve here today. So I'm just going to hand over back to Elena to close the session and to do the feedback and reviews. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I mean, just to add, there is a must-have. That means it's by law, and this is what your lawyer will tell you. You must do this, must do this, must do this. And there's also a good to have. So I think for all the different markets that you're in, just be clear what are the must-have so that you don't get into trouble with the law, and what are some of the good to have because you want to be compassionate or you want to be, just ending this this relationship with on a good note. Urge you to take a look at it in your own country as well. All right, so I believe some of you, just bear with me for a few minutes, but you know, I believe some of you have got maybe some very sensitive questions or maybe very specific questions that you feel that's not the right venue to bring up in this chat. You know, feel free to just scan the QR code and fill up your name, and we will give you a call to schedule a short, you know, one-on-one teleconsult. Yeah, so I'll give you maybe just a minute to just scan this QR code. Yeah, and then and just one more thing. This is the first time we're talking about retrenchment. You know, like we said, we've only seen a growth story, so wasn't easy for us to, I guess, you know, it's a bit off of our comfort zone to do this with all the startup founders and the ecosystem in general. But if you can just, you know, kind of put on your chat a quick feedback, 1 for not useful, and 3 for very useful. So just please just dump it into the chat so that we know where we stand and we have a bit of a temperature check on the topic. Then, okay, thank you everyone. I can see all the numbers coming through.
5, wow.
Okay, yeah, please be candid about it, because we might want to do this again if we find it useful, because we see the acceleration of retrenchment coming through. And if you have any feedback, if you want us to make it even more startup centric, particularly some of the more creative ways, maybe I can, you know, have a separate chat with Ali and the investors on this call as well. But last but not least, it is the eve of a public holiday, just in case you forgot. Actually, I forgot. I tried to schedule meetings tomorrow. We're all in a bit of a messy schedule right now, not knowing what's a work day and what's not, but it is the eve of a public holiday. And let's continue to stay positive, stay energized. If you have well, I think because of my virtual background, I've got a glass of wine that I'd like to toast to all of you. Yeah. And I think my teammates have one.
You want to share your screen? You can see you on video.
Okay, let me just stop share. Yeah. So cheers to a good long weekend. Stay positive, stay home, stay safe, and see you all again. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye. Stay safe.